Hello, my name's Alan Levin, and this is another in a series of YouTube and also podcasts called Crossing the Boundary, in which I have conversations with people who I have found are doing really good work in the world and have themselves, in some way or another, crossed boundaries of um, ethnic identity, religion, uh, ideological thinking, ways of being in the world. So here we are. Today I'm going to be speaking with Eva Dalak. And I didn't ask you, is that how you say the last name, Dalak?
Eva Dalak, yeah,
Dalak,
Dalak.
Dalak, and who is a peace activator. And we'll talk more about what that means as we get into it. I learned about Eva by happening to watch a podcast that she was being interviewed on with a woman, Shir Gadassi, an Israeli woman. And in that interview, I learned of Eva's work and how she's been working now, particularly with Israelis and Palestinians, doing healing work related to trauma, and that she has a very spiritual, psychological and spiritual orientation and some very interesting ways of looking at the problems that are facing the people there and for all of us. So let me read a little bit of Eva's background. I'll just summarize it because I'll post with this YouTube and series more of the details, including information about how to be in contact with her and learn more about her work. Her background is that she grew up in Jaffa, Israel, in a Muslim family, went to a Christian Jesuit school. She studied in France and has two master's degrees in international relations and international administration from the Sorbonne. She worked in Brussels with an international NGO and later was an independent consultant for the European Union. She traveled extensively in Africa, worked with the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Ivory Coast and later in New York. And she currently lives in Costa Rica, where she co-created with her partner a well-being retreat center, which is her safe base, from where she works as an international consultant, facilitator, and trainer. She's worked in highly diverse, dynamic, and complex multicultural contexts in various conflict zones in Africa, the Middle East, and the Southeast Asia area. She's supported communities and individuals in resolving conflicts using a variety of modalities and multiple skills and tools. So welcome, Eva. I'm really happy
Thank you.
to meet you and learn more about your work and share it with our audience. Um, let's start
Thank you.
with where you come from. By that I mean your ancestry, your family as you grew up. What was it like in your family? And I'm also particularly interested always in what sort of religious or spiritual experience was there when you were
Mhm.
growing up?
So as I mentioned in my bio, my name is Eva Dalak. I'm Palestinian. I grew up in Israel. I was born to a Muslim conservative family, and at the age of 3, I was in a Jewish kindergarten, and later on in a Christian school. So I was based in like the three religions. Um, at home, one religion, Islam, and in the kindergarten, the Jewish religion, and in the school, the Christian religion. And for me as a child, it didn't really make sense because each of this religion was telling me to be how exclusive they are. And walking, or at least playing through the different dimension, I was thinking of it as a child, that there was like this big father with 3 kids that couldn't agree on who was right, and they all wanted part of the pie. And I encountered So in my child mind, I just made it into like they all go together. They just don't agree about who's right or wrong. And so to make, I think in my imagination and in to find safety within myself, I kind of created this story of it's all good. It just like in each of this container, I'm supposed to be in a certain way. And so adjusting my behavior, my language, um, my adaptability based on where I was and with whom I was interacting, and noticing how similar they were, but in a different way. In like, as they say, same, but different. And so for me, it made sense at the time. That's how I grew up. So I was in Israel until the age of 19. I was in this French school, had baccalaureate, and then I had a scholarship to travel to France to study law school. And my friend, my Jewish friend, went to the army. So I went to study, and they went to the army. And this as well.
Can I just ask you though, how did your parents feel about, or was there any sort of sense of conflict about your sense of identity and religion as you were growing up?
There was disagreement, not conflict. My father used to say, "We don't have to agree. I don't agree with what you say. Let's just like
Mhm.
not talk about." We didn't agree on politics and we didn't agree on religion. I had,
Uh-huh.
especially when I grew up, I had very particular views. But also, I grew up in a house that was very tolerant. My father never imposed religion on us. He said, "You need to come to Islam is surrender. You need to surrender to it." So I was never forced as a child to be religious. I was never forced to pray. It was recommended. My father would have liked me to pray and to participate in more religious activities and study Quran, but it was never imposed. And he didn't also impose it on my mother. So he was the first time that became really religious, went to the Hajj, went to the Mecca, which is then that's when he became a religious figure in our traditions, but he didn't impose it on his family. And then my mother later on, like 5 years or 6 years later, she found her way back to Islam and became religious. My sister, like 5 years ago, found her way to Islam. So we grew up in a house that was never imposing any sort of way of being, but there were certain rules of conduct in society that were imposed on everybody as a society, but not in a religious term.
What about in terms of an identity? You went to school with Jewish, Christian children. Was there a strong sense of being a Palestinian at that time?
No,
Being
no,
an
no.
Arab, being a Jew,
It
being an
was more,
Israeli?
yeah. So the identity, I definitely at the time I wasn't consider myself or referring to myself as Palestinian. At the time, there were the way we were referred to in Israel is Arab Israeli, and within this Arab community, we were either Christian, Muslim, Druze, or Bedouin. Like there were so many sects within that Arab community, and that's was the politics of Israel to divide and rule. Like there was no sense of unified Palestinian community. There was this Arabs in Israel, and then there was this Palestinian that were the enemy of Israel that we need to be detached of. Except that part of my family was in Gaza and the other part was in Nablus. But at the time, there was no articulation. There was a sense of family, of common identity, common family, but not a sense of common identity as a Palestinian. We are one unified um, community, I would say. We were referred to by Palestinian, we would be referred to Arab 1948, and then they're Palestinian. So to distinguish, even now, sometimes people say, oh, to distinguish, we're talking about Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza, and then Arab 1948, and then Arab of the diaspora. And one of my projects is actually we need a unified sense of community. Like either we're like Palestinian, doesn't matter which date, stop dividing the dates. Like there's the Nakba date of 1948, then there's 1967, which are the dates that goes with the war with Israel. So there's the Arab that the result of the war in 1948, and there's the result of the war in 1967, which became the occupied territories. And then the Palestinians within Israel, got the actual identity, Israeli identity. Because at the time, Moshe Dayan, a political figure in Israel, said that we cannot control both Palestinian inside Israel and those that we just have taken control of. We need to make a choice, and these Palestinians will have to have the Israeli identity. And because up until then, we had similar rules as military rules, as the Palestinian, the occupied territories. So we couldn't like circulate. I wasn't born at the time. That's what I learned later on. So it is a strategic politics also to divide the identity. And for me, on a personal level, I came to my Palestinian identity very, very late in life, after I left Israel, because in Israel, at home, there was no discussion on politics. There was discussion on religion, but not on politics, because my father and my mother were traumatized Palestinian, like after the war. My mom was born in May 4th, 1948. So she actually was born.
Wow.
The fact that she was born at that date is why I'm actually in Israel and not in Gaza. If my mom wasn't born that day, because her mother was on the boat with all her family running from Jaffa to Gaza, and she got contraction. So she had to step out of the boat, go back to Jaffa, give birth to my mom, and so lost contact with her family.
Oh.
And that's how we stayed in Israel.
Oh.
Then for my father, it was his father stayed. He was part of the Palestinian army, so he was in the combat. And then after the war was over, Israel didn't allow anybody to come back. His family ran away to Jordan, and only your direct family was allowed to come back. So his wife and his kids, but his brothers and sisters couldn't come back. And so that's how I'm actually we remain in Israel, and later on got the Israeli identity.
Yeah. Well, thank you. As a child, was there a sense of Israel being an enemy or
No.
a problem of some kind, or were you aware of the sense that the Jewish state of Israel was in some ways a dominating force on you and your life and your family?
In a way, it wasn't clearly articulated as such, but it was very normalized that as an Arab, I don't have the same right as Jews, and it's normal.
It's just the way it is.
It's the way it is, and it's like second-class citizen. So, for instance, I really wanted I actually wanted to go to the army, because the army was like kind of the harmonizing element of the whole society. So what you do after school, you go to the army, and part of the Palestinian society, like the Druze and the Bedouin, did go to the army. That's also part of how, again, how the community was divided. But then you knew that unless you go to the army, like even when you're looking for a job, it's like whatever you want to do is based on what you did in the army. So kind of the army is harmonizing kind of a programmation of all the youth from 18 to 21. And then that kind of define your career in life. And so at the time, I was like, oh, I'm going to miss this experience. And luckily for me, I got the experience to travel to France and study there and be programmed differently. But that's what explained the deep trauma right now and my own understanding of the Palestinian and Israeli society in Israel, and why it is that right now in Israel, it's really hard to find compassion for Palestinians. They have to question everything they've ever been told. Right. And that's traumatic. That's like they have to question the essence of their existence. And I have a lot of compassion for that. And I think that's why we need to really go there with trauma-informed eyes. We cannot just like, come on, how can't you not see it? You can't, because the whole society is built on so many myths of like, this is not going to happen to us. Like we're just coming out of the Holocaust. We're going to make sure that we're like the top of the top. We're the strongest, and nobody ever is going to like, attack us in this way again. But in the process, they kind of lost their eye to see how they're doing it for other people. and on what they're building their new state.
Yeah,
Because Palestine was like a land without people for people without land. And for many Israelis, it's amazing. They really believe that.
I know.
They hold on to this reality or to this myth.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Thank you for sharing all that. How did your own process go? So you went to France, you studied at the Sorbonne, you got these degrees. How did you end up in conflict areas and in Africa and in other parts of the world?
Yeah. So when I went to France, the first place I landed was Strasbourg. And when I said that at the University of Law there, and I think that's where my Palestinian identity came to alive, because I realized that I couldn't say I'm Arab Israeli.
Uh,
I met the Jewish community there, welcomed me when I arrived as an Israeli. People at the time, people didn't distinguish. They thought that Israel was just a Jewish state and all people that are Israelis are Jews. And so they invited me for a Shabbat, and I was happy because I mean I used to do Shabbat also in Israel. And then when we started the conversation, they're like, "Oh, so were you doing Shabbat in Israel?" I said, "No, I would be invited to Shabbat, but our day is Friday." And he's like, "Our day? Like, what religion are you? Aren't you Jewish?" I said, "No, I'm Muslim." Like, "But you're Israeli." I said, "I know, that's my passport." And they're like, "But you cannot be Israeli and not Jewish." And I said, "But I can. Like half of like there's at least 20% of us that are not Jewish actually." And that was really an eye-opening for me, because remember, I was in a household that didn't speak politics. I was in a school, also I didn't mention it, but in the school we weren't allowed to speak politics. We were studying the politics of France, politics and geography of France. So we didn't do anything on Israel. So while the Intifada was going on, the first Intifada, we had no clue what was going on. We weren't allowed to speak about it. There was no books at the time. There was no internet. So when I came out from Israel, and I was sharing with an Israeli friend or neighbor here, it's like, it's such a bubble. You come out of there and you're like, oh my God, this whole world exists and it has a completely different narrative than where we're growing up and what we're being told. And so that was the beginning of my own process of identity, finding my identity. Who am I? And it wasn't an easy one, and it wasn't a quick one. I'm still grappling with it. Like now I'm seated better in it, but it's been 30 years that I've been like working with it. And basically what I wanted to do was to study law and go back to Israel. But at the time in Jaffa, a lot of the criminals were Arabs. And so when I worked with a Jewish lawyer, and he was like, "You have nothing to do here. Like you have to go to stay away from Israel and really allow yourself to expand beyond what this Israeli society is allowing you." One of the best advice I've ever had. And so that's what got me. That's when I like let go of the dream of going back to Israel, getting married, having a traditional lifestyle, basically, of what is expected from a Palestinian girl, you know. And so when I had, again, I had scholarship, so that was really helpful to finish my studies at the Sorbonne. And then I got approached by a Jewish American, Rich Eisendorf, that asked me if I would be interested in joining a program that they had in Brussels, and that was the organization Search for Common Ground. It's one of the largest organizations working in conflict transformation still to date. And he invited me to work on the Middle East program. I speak Arabic, Hebrew, French, and English, and that was a great asset. So I worked with them for a couple of years until the second Intifada. And when the second Intifada happened, I was like, this conflict is like like it just doesn't make sense. And there's no honesty on how we want to deal with it. This was a Jewish organization led by a Jewish person. And they normalized the occupation. They weren't willing to look truly on like what is the root causes of the conflict, and really treating Palestinian and Israeli on equal stand, and just like bringing people together to create peace. And for me, it's like the issue is not the people. There's like some structures and institutions and system and belief that we're not actually tackling at all. So I don't want to do anything with this conflict anymore. And that kind of, I wanted to know, how do other conflict do it, you know? And that got me to Burundi. And in Burundi, I was like, I really wanted to be in a conflict that wouldn't trigger me emotionally, because I was really triggered by the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I just felt the injustice was so high that I wouldn't be able, sorry, that I wouldn't be able to express myself without crying. Like I really couldn't find any, and I wasn't yet processed. I haven't done therapy. So it was really hard for me to deal with it. So I thought at the time, again, still before therapy, that if I go to other conflict zone, it would be easier. Definitely not. So can you pause? Sorry. So I thought by going, this is like interesting, but I thought by going to Burundi, it would be easier.
Mm.
And Burundi used to be a colony of Belgium. And I had a Belgian nationality because I was working in Brussels for 10 years. And so in Burundi, suddenly I was confronted again to another identity that was rejected. And I didn't want to present myself as Belgian. So I went back to my identity as Palestinian and say, oh, I'm actually Palestinian with a Belgian nationality. And at the time I was training youth in leadership, and they just couldn't get it. But what do you mean Palestinian? Like, do you mean like another white man is occupying another white man, like white community? They do that for each other? And I say, yeah, like, you know? And so that was really another key moment for me of like, oh, here it's safer to say that I'm Palestinian rather than Belgium, versus in other places it was safer to say I'm Belgium than Palestinian. So that was another key moment. And it taught me in one of the projects that we were doing was with Theater and Reconciliation, an amazing person, Frédéric Leconte. We were doing work with Hutu and Tutsi. That was after the genocide in Rwanda. So a lot of healing work was being done after the genocide. And we were using theater as a tool. And one of the scene was about competition of suffering. Who suffered more? Hutu showing what the Tutsi did to them, and Tutsis showing what the Hutu did to them. And I was watching this and I was like crying, forget not being triggered emotionally. And I was like, that's exactly what we're doing in Palestine, Israel. We're comparing suffering, we're competing about who suffers more, and nobody wins in this. You cannot compare suffering. Each suffering stands in its, in its own. And from Burundi, I worked in Rwanda, in Congo, Angola, Liberia, Sierra Leone, like Ivory Coast, and so many different countries. Like I worked for more than 22 countries in Africa.
And you were doing like hands-on work with people. I mean, you're
Yes,
bringing
yeah.
people in rooms and having them do
Mm,
processes with each other. Is
No,
that
no, 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 no.
no?
No, I was doing conflict transformation. I was doing training, facilitation of conflict transformation. So building processes. So I wasn't yet, and I will get to the psychology work, but I wasn't yet, didn't do my own therapy and didn't get into therapy yet. This was, we were using theater as a tool. The outcome was therapeutic, but our intention wasn't therapy. These were processes of conflict resolution, dialogue, conflict analysis, understanding the interest and needs, walking away from position. So really traditional conflict resolution mechanism that were to bring people together, to help them understand what's happening, to analyze the conflict, to share the narrative, and to mediate. I was doing a lot of mediation, a lot of negotiation, a lot of facilitation with mainly with women, youth, rebel group, child soldiers, and training facilitators. I was doing a lot of training for people at the to work hands-on in the community. So a lot of work that I was doing was community-driven reconstruction. I was working with violence against women, a lot of women's political empowerment, economic empowerment, DDR processes. So I was working with the United Nations peacekeeping mission. So a lot of this work is very, I would say, linear peace building. And then I met my partner, and he came from this world. He came from the world of well-being, yoga, psychology, therapy, primal therapy from California. And when I met him, that was like,
Where was he from?
He's French American. He's French
French.
American, and he left France at the
Uh-huh.
age of 19 to go to LA and do primal therapy that was
Uh-huh.
invented by his
I see.
uncle.
Okay.
And so this was his world. And so this was the clash of civilization, the mixture there. And when we got together, he came to stay with me in Ivory Coast. And after a couple of years, I went to stay with him in California, and I discovered spiritual psychology. And I realized there for 3 months, I was living in Topanga.
Wait, can
And
I ask you what year was that you
that
did
was 2008. 2008, I met him. And
uh-huh,
2010, we moved
to California?
to California because it was just like a month before everything exploded in Ivory Coast. So
Uh-huh.
it was clear that we couldn't stay anymore in Africa. And for him, he followed his heart, he followed me. But at the same time, this wasn't his environment, and it was really hard for him. And after 2 years, he's like, I cannot do this anymore. This is like, I'm losing my soul. I need to go back to California. And I followed him. But I followed him saying, okay, I'm expert in conflict. I've never lived in any other place than conflict. There's nothing I can do in California. And then a friend said, well, you can do spiritual psychology. It's a program where you can go only 1 weekend a month, and that would be enough for you to get a visa, a student visa for the States. I mean, I had my visa for the US was based on my work with the UN. So I had a diplomatic visa. So I had to drop my diplomatic visa, get a student visa, apply for this program, which was amazing. I can say this is what transformed my life. Because when I came to it's spiritual psychology at the University of Santa Monica, led by Dr. Ron and Mary Hulnick, I realized that my comfort zone was conflict zone, that I'm more comfortable in conflict and crisis rather than in, this environment. There was nothing to do, I felt. And then I realized, oh my God, there was so much to do inside. And that's kind of what defined my work right now. This is like the inner work that I started doing, and just seeing how much conflict, identity conflict I had inside of myself that were reflected in, outside as a projection.
So these were conflicts within yourself that you started to become aware of and started to heal or resolve, and you kind of saw that that's what drew you into. Can you hear me? Looks like your picture is frozen. Eva, having technical difficulty here. Yeah, so Eva, this work that you have been evolving, you call yourself a peace activator. Now, I know a lot of people are peace activists, and so you're making a distinction there. And I'm sure it has something to do with what you've been saying about this healing work that you focused on of the inner part of yourself. But elaborate a little bit on that. What's a peace activator?
Yeah, peace activation and peace activator was actually a term that Dr. Ron Holnick gave me when I was doing spiritual psychology. As I said, this was really a big realization of how deep inner work I needed to do, and I was doing. But at the same time, I was telling him, this is all good here in Santa Monica. I'm going to Israel, and as soon as I get there, I get triggered. Like, I didn't even leave the plane. I'm already triggered by the sentence, welcome back home. And my immediate reaction is like, this is not your home. This is my homeland. And Ron said, yeah, this is because you're a peace activist and not a peace activator. And you need to do peace activation. And I said, well, what's the difference? What is that? And he said that you need to really work on the triggers. That be okay if you're triggered, then your school is in session. Like, this means that you have something there that you need to work on that has nothing to do with the external environment. And so you need to activate the peace inside of you before you can seek it outside, because once you have it inside, it will reflect outside, and that will inform the action that you will be taking. And that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and I wasn't there yet. I definitely wasn't there. It took me all this time to really launch Peace Activation, and I launched it in after October 7, because I realized, oh my God, this is really my dharma. This is what's happening. Up until then, I didn't work on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I stayed away. It seems just it was. I felt there was no honesty and authenticity about what was going on. There was a lot of the peace process was biased. The work that was being done was honest on the people to people level, on the human level, on becoming friends, but not actually dealing with the root causes of the conflict and acknowledging what actually happened. And that's what got me to launch, before Peace Activation, one whole piece with my friend Dalit Eliyahu. Also, she also has done spiritual psychology in Santa Monica and brought the program in Israel. She's actually doing this in Hebrew in Israel. And at the time, Dr. Ron told me, you need to connect with Dalit and see how you both can work together on bringing this teaching to Israel, because we felt that unless we work on the Israeli Jewish community in Israel, for them to come out of this bubble, we won't be able to really tackle the conflict as it is. And to tackle the conflict, we needed to deal with the psychological root causes of the conflict. And as we said in the beginning, this would mean that Israeli and Jewish, and I distinguish between Israeli Jewish in Israel and Jewish outside of Israel, had to really reclaim their identity as human and not as Israeli, so that they can understand that acknowledging the wrong they have done to the Palestinian people doesn't deny their own essence. Do you see what I mean? It's like, it's so hard right now.
It doesn't deny what?
Their essence, their essence.
Right.
It doesn't deny their essence, their existence. It doesn't deny who they are, that their Jewish identity is larger than the state of Israel that was created and has created so much wrong, that they need to de-identify themselves from the state and remember this human, large Jewish identity.
Right.
And so a lot of the work that we have done with Dalit was really to work in Hebrew with Israelis, Palestinians.
Were you able to go to Israel yourself and do work with her?
I've been all this.
You're allowed to go in and out of Israel?
Of course, yeah. I still have my Israeli nationality.
That's right.
I have an Israeli passport. I have all my families there. I live in Costa Rica, but I go there at least once a year.
Well,
up
I know
until
Palestinians
COVID,
who aren't able.
Then,
I know Palestinians who aren't able to go through Israel. They have to go to Jordan to get into where they want to go.
Because they don't have an Israeli passport.
That's right. They don't have an Israeli passport.
An Israeli passport.
Yeah.
So I have an Israeli passport. I have all my family has Israeli passport and are living in Israel and working in Israel. And our life is there, or their life is there, and then I go to visit. So when I went back, I would go back and do workshop with Dalit 2 or 3 times a year. We called it One Whole Piece. And One Whole Piece is really dealing with the root causes of the conflict, but within the Jewish community, and inviting also the Arab community. So, but in the same proportion. And it's really to understand that we need to go out of this matrix story that was created, and it doesn't deny who we are, that we still can keep our essence as human being, having a spiritual experience. And the spiritual experience is actually what is happening right now. And we don't need to be attached to it. We just need to learn the lesson so that we can evolve in our consciousness. So we were doing that up until COVID, and then during COVID we were doing it online. And after October 7, we did a couple of calls with the community on victim consciousness. How can we raise because a lot of the consciousness right now is righteousness, who's right and who's wrong. And peace activation is really about a field out there beyond wrongdoing and right doing. There's a field. I'll meet you there. That's Rumi's quote. And this field is a field of non-judgment. The field of compassion in action is finding the trigger, being okay with the trigger, holding space for yourself while you are in the trigger, if you're able, so that you can also hold space for the other in the trigger. And so we do that actually in practical terms. We do that every week in a weekly call on Friday at 6 p.m. Jerusalem time online. Israeli and Palestinian join the call, and also other people, Jewish, Palestinian from mixed couple, Jewish from mixed couple, international that have nothing to do with Palestine and Israel, but are triggered or annoyed or, intrigued by the conflict. So anybody is welcome. So it's not a space only dedicated to Palestinian and Israeli, but there are Palestinian and Israeli. It's dedicated to building a field of soul-based peace building. And soul-based peace building means that we are really looking at our own responsibility of creating the reality and the experience that we're having, and moving away from this consciousness of blame, shame, and guilt into our heart. And so it's practicing heart-centered listening and allowing our emotion to be moved. So emotion like energy in motion, so that anybody is expressing their emotion, the other person is not replying or reframing, just deep listening. And the amount of healing that has happened ever since is amazing, including for myself, like for all of us. So there's nobody, we're all in the same, I would say, level in this field. It's like we're all going through something, whether you're a facilitator, a coach, a activist, etc. No, we all need to activate peace from inside.
Right.
And this goes through mindfulness, it goes through meditation, it goes through psychedelic, whatever works for you. But understand that you're doing you and you're not doing me.
No.
And I'm doing me, and it's okay,
Yeah. So it sounds like wonderful work, but I'm wondering, many people who have been doing work bridging human Palestinians. There you are. Many people who've been doing work bridging actual people, Palestinians and Israelis, found that October 7th was like a moment where things fell apart. I know some of the peace groups retreated into their separate identities, and the blame and shame, and especially the ongoing massacre that's taking place in Gaza, and the acceleration of what's happening, settler violence in the West Bank. I'm just wondering, did that affect your work as well? Did people retreat from? I know many Jews who were progressive, liberal, wanted to have some sort of peaceful arrangement with the Palestinian people, ended up supporting the war, supporting the invasion of Gaza and so forth.
Yeah.
And
And
how do you deal with that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, got disconnected again.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah, so do you remember, you got my
Yeah,
question?
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what I was referring to before, because they weren't dealing with the root causes of conflict. A lot of the work that was being done was normalizing the occupation, or at least wasn't taking that into consideration, or was like adjusting to fit within the structure that was occupying the other party. And a lot of the peace process and peace building project were dealing with Palestinian at the same level as Israeli. Like if I'm talking with Israeli, I have to talk with Palestinian, like really at this equal level of like, if I give this to the Israeli, I need to give this to the Palestinian. If I give this to the Palestinian, and we're not in competition here. We're like, there's deep suffering, deep trauma, and we cannot keep comparing and making sure that we're doing it on equal foot. There's no equal foot. There's an occupier, a system, and there's occupied. And to avoid going into the drama triangle of persecution and a victim and the savior, which is what's happened with these peace processes. It's like we have the savior, the international mediator, or the international program. What I'm offering is something completely different. Is actually, and that's why Israeli and Palestinian come to my calls, because we're not comparing. Every suffering, every pain stand in its own. What we realize with Dalit is that right now, the Israeli Jewish are so ingrained in their own trauma of October 7, there's no space even to see the effect of that, of what happened. You have a whole society that is right now not kind of part of this society, lost their humanity in justifying genocide and massacre because of what happened in October 7. They are in their pain. Right now, they're in deep pain and suffering, and it's really an eye for an eye. And they don't realize that it's not it's really in this process, they've killed everything, not including their own humanity, because they have no more access to their heart and
So
to have that compassion.
did you find that the
And so
people, Eva, did you find that the people that you were actually working with did that they retreated from the calls or from the work and that you were doing?
I wouldn't say, my peace activation work has started in October 7th. So the people that came to the call are some of the people that are actually survived the massacre. And the people that did the one whole piece, with the Netanyahu, they are working right now. They're working on raising their own consciousness, understanding how to get out of the matrix. And what we saw with Dalit is that there's a deep work that needs to be done within Israel and deep work that needs to be done within Palestine that takes responsibility for their own work inside. And then there's the work, the systemic and structural violence work that needs to be tackled. And this is not going to be tackled by people-to-people work. This is a higher level of diplomacy that has to be tackled by gathering the majority of the people. Like everybody's hostage right now in Israel, not only the hostage in those that are in Gaza, but actually everybody's hostage of Bibi's politics. And people are awakening to it, but they're not yet at the step of taking responsibility. Some of them are still in the narrative of suffering and in comparing the suffering. We just celebrated the Nakba and the Shoah Day. People in Israel are living in 1940, 45. They're not realizing what they're doing right now and not awakening to it. And so for me, it's really the answer to this is we need to break down this identity that makes me as a Palestinian and you as a Jewish Israeli like lose our humanity and understand that person has the right, your ability is to make it, and that it's not in your name that this is stopping.
I'm having a little internet problem, I think. You're there now? Okay, good. Yeah. So this issue
I'm
of
there.
big
So I feel
policy,
like it's our responsibility. Yeah.
The issue of relating to the political situation, the structural situation, the systemic situation, and relating to the human reality of how it is that our fixed identities can separate us from other people, and we make them other. We close our hearts to them. We don't have empathy for their suffering. Do you see how those can come together? Is there a way that the work to change the system is also part of or integrated with the work to change the hearts of individual human beings?
Yes, I do see that. I see that because I did work in a lot of these systems and policy levels.
Right.
And what I saw is that people forget that we are the one who put this system and this policy level. we created so much separation. This separation is not between the Jewish and the Palestinian. The separation is between the people and the system, the people and the policy. We created is playing the master on top of us. And so that's where, again, peace activation is to activate your own power, your own inner peace, and understand that we have been told that we're powerless and helpless in this, that this is a complex situation that we cannot touch on, that if you speak to this side, like you have to choose a side. And if you're choosing a side, then once you choose a side, this is the road to that solution. Like it's either one state solution, it's either two state solution. What if we expand the box and think beyond these states? What if we expand the box beyond these identities and understand that right now we are all, everybody, Palestinian, Israeli, international, we're all being manipulated by politics and by system of domination and
I think that everybody has a role to play here. No, everybody has a piece for this piece, and it's a play on word. And I think we shouldn't try to do everything at the same time, but we should do it in connection, in collaboration, and in partnership, and understand that one thing cannot go without the other. Doing grassroots work is necessary, but it's not enough. The policy work is necessary, but it's not enough. It has to be connected. We need to work on maximizing people, because what you see right now within Israel is such a deep trauma, and the settler violence that is going out of proportion, the massacre in Gaza that is going out of proportion and is being justified by the people in the street. Why? Because that's where they can feel they have power back. And because of the system, the way Israel's system is created and dominates people, by like everybody in Israel is right now involved because everybody has to go to the army. So it's not like you have a choice. You can choose not to go to the army, but every family has somebody in the army, every family. So that's why it's like a whole country is right now in deep trauma, fighting what happened in October 7 and is incapable of seeing what had led to October 7, is incapable of seeing what, because that would mean deep soul search of like, what did we say yes to all these years, not realizing. So there are some individuals that are awakening and are speaking out, like Combatant for Peace, Standing Together. So there are some organizations that are working together, you know, Palestinian and Israeli hand in hand, the Parent Circle, Grieving Circle, etc., understanding, oh my God, we're actually in this together and we're here to stay. At the same time, if you put the same ingredients in the salad, the taste is going to be the same. It's not going to change. We need to change the ingredients. And the ingredients is not continuously talking about what happened, what is happening, and how you are to blame or I am to blame. The ingredients that we need right now is really deep compassion and deep trauma healing. And for me, it's not only between the Palestinian and Israeli. There's trauma healing work that needs to be done with the German, with the Brits, with like the European colonialism that has brought, like we're focusing on Palestine, Israel as it's like outside, like just one vortex outside of a whole context. But actually from geopolitical perspective, this is just one part within the holistic international politic at the time, the colonial power and the colonialism that were happening at the time. And what is breaking down right now in the system is actually all this international system that rose up from after World War II, you know, the international institution, the European Union, the United Nations, all of their mechanism is falling apart because we're seeing that they're actually not being practiced. They don't walk the talk. They're not being practicing what we've been working so hard to build, all this human rights framework. It's just like it's not being applied to what's happening in Gaza. And so that kind of like we see the king without his clothes, and it's time for us to act.
It's really, I'm really happy to hear you saying these things, partly because from what I heard in the part of the interview that I had seen, you seem to be only focused on individual consciousness change. And I wondered what you thought about the larger picture and how people there are some people who are adept at that and skilled at that and need to, and it needs to be focused on, I think, as well. What are your thoughts about the wave of student protests here in the United States and in other parts of the world as well? Do you think it's helpful to the cause that as you see it?
I think it's helpful, not necessarily for the cause. I think it's helpful in a way, but because of the violence that it attached to it, and because it's not activated in the way that is building consensus together, it defeats the purpose. Right now, what happened, all the pro-Palestinian movement have been identified as anti-Semitized. So to be pro-Palestinian means that you need to hate the Jews. Or to be supportive of the Jewish, then you need to hate the Palestinian. Like even worldwide, we have become polarized. We have become either this side or that side. Nobody is trying to see where can we actually meet in the middle. A lot of these students have a lot in common, but they're not, because they stick to their own identity and they have their own interpretation of what it means to support Palestinian and what it means to support the Jewish or the Israeli state, then they're fighting each other instead of working together. We have a problem. We all have a problem right now with Israel as a state and with Bibi Netanyahu, with what is happening in Gaza. Everybody, if you're a human being, you cannot not have a problem with that. So we have a problem. We are not the problem. That's the difference. What's been happening now is that the students are fighting each other over the problem, blaming each other on the problem, and a lot of the Jewish students, I'm assuming, I haven't worked there, so my perception from outside is that they feel threatened. They need to protect themselves. On the other side, so everybody is camping on their own position rather than coming together to work. Like as a student in this university, you wanna do peace. You don't want to fight. You want to stand for truth. You want to say that what the state of Israel is doing is not representing the Jewish identity. You need to detach your identity from what the state in Israel like. And if you are, there are people that are supporting the Jewish identity and are not supporting the state of Israel. This doesn't make them less of a Jewish.
Yeah, a good deal, as I've been part of it, and to some extent, a good deal of the protest movement are Jews who do feel as though their attachment and kind of making it synonymous that if you're Jewish, you're pro whatever Israel is doing. That their aim is to separate that, to kind of make the case that to be Jewish is to stand for certain values, for certain human values. It's not necessarily to be identified with Israel. You made a very interesting comment in the interview that I saw, where you said that people are riding the wave of Gaza.
Gaza.
Yeah, say
Yeah.
a little more about that. I was fascinated by that and some of the other comments you made about that.
I believe, as I said, like my background comes from different places in Africa and different places I've worked with in conflict zone. And what I notice is that there's a lot of injustice that are happening, and including in some of the peace processes and government manipulation and system in place and development aid, the way development aid have created a codependency relationship with their population. And so I feel like people are riding the wave of Gaza in the sense of like Gaza right now symbolized the fight for freedom, end of occupation, ceasefire now, etc. This is like freedom for all. And so for me, the search for freedom, as I said earlier, is our birthright. And so Gaza is not particular in seeking freedom. What Gaza is particular at is symbolizing on a world level, international level, how a whole population is under occupation in a physical sense. But we are actually all under mental occupation. And we're not seeing it. So what Gaza is allowing us to see is how false this international system is how false this development aid is, humanitarian aid, all these principles. So Gaza is here, and we're seeing all the people that are dying daily, and nobody is doing anything. And even when the aid is sent to Gaza, is being bashed by Israeli kids. Like kids are bashing food that is sent to give to the Gaza population. So this is just the physical level. But actually, if we take that, a lot of the people in Africa are frustrated with the government. A lot of the people in the States are frustrated with the government. A lot of the people in Europe are frustrated with the government or of certain system. So we're taking this wave and we're creating this is the trigger. This is the activation, but we're using it to express what's not good for us, but we're not taking responsibility for what's not good for us. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
And
Yeah.
so it's really like, it's same like when I came to the University of Santa Monica and I'm like, oh, I've been using all these conflict places so that I don't deal with my own conflict inside. And actually, I am very uncomfortable in peace. I cannot be in a peaceful state because I feel useless and I want to be useful. So I'm going to go and do this development aid and do this, work, development cooperation, rather than deal with how I feel abandoned, how I feel betrayed, how I feel like humiliated. Right now, we're dealing with all these wounds on an international level, how we are feeling betrayed by the international community as Palestinian. But also, if you see in the States or in other countries, people are feeling betrayed by their community, by their friends, by their family. And so how do you deal with such an amount of injustice? And injustice is another wound that we're not willing to deal with. And humiliation and abandonment and rejection. So that's what I mean when I say we're riding the wave of Gaza to see it on a physical level, but we're actually having exactly the same inside of us. And that's why if we activate it, if we deal with it inside of us in trauma healing, then we will be able to have a different reality in the world.
It's a very hopeful view of what is a horrible situation, and I share it in some ways. I think my way of saying that is that this could be a spark that helps awaken the transformation in human consciousness that's necessary for us to have a better world, for us to have and avert the catastrophes that are coming that are much larger than what's going on even in Israel, Gaza, like climate change, for example.
Absolutely.
So
and then we push it
and
even
only
further.
a change in human consciousness collectively can do that. And if Gaza is what's going to help people wake up because they see the horror of what is the ultimate outcome of the systems that we've got in place, then
I tell you what,
inshallah, as they say, right?
Inshallah,
But
in God's
there's
willing.
another thing you said about what's going on, which you said how the phrase "from the river to the sea." That's a very triggering phrase. There's a lot of conflict about it, even amongst people who are protesting in support of the Palestinians and to bring about a ceasefire. That using that phrase for many Jews seems to be something very threatening, even though the government of Israel, the Likud party, which is in the government of Israel, actually has that in their charter, that from the Mediterranean right to the Jordan, that there will be Jewish sovereignty. So they want, but you used that phrase to say that it's actually part of the same idea that from the river to the sea, everyone will be free, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, or from from the Indian Ocean to the
like
right?
whatever river, with Dalit we're saying whatever river, whatever sea, let's all be free. We don't need to limit ourselves to this holy land. And also when we call the holy land, like in my prayer when we're doing this weekly call, I say the holy land extend beyond Palestine, Israel. The whole earth.
I like to say the holy land is where you are.
Exactly. It's
Right
where
under
you are, and
right under your feet.
Absolutely. It's the earth, it's Mother Earth.
Mother Earth.
What I want to say is a couple of things. One, I really deeply believe that Palestinians and Israelis are noble enemies. Noble enemies in the sense that on a higher conscious level, they've chosen this situation to be enemies and to fight for this holy land so that humanity can rise its consciousness. That's why I say let's raise our consciousness and not our righteousness. Conflict, in that sense, this conflict is an opportunity, because up until October 7, nobody even thought or cared about Palestinian. We've been occupied for 75 years. Nobody really paid any attention. It was justified. It was normalized. Nobody questioned it. And so in that sense, it created a spark. But not only for the Palestinian, also for the world to see that what we've created after World War II is a system based on fear that is occupying us mentally and physically right now. And from the river to the sea is when it's being said by the Palestinian, it's like, oh my God, is Holocaust coming again, you know? But we're not seeing that it's exactly the same what the Jews are doing, and their Holocaust is happening right now there in this holy land. It's happening and nobody's paying attention because they're blinded by their own pain and suffering. And that's why I say, unless we deal with the trauma, there's no way we can create any system change. And that includes people inside those systems, because people that are inside of this system, they are also traumatized. I worked in this system. This system is basically for you to forget your sovereignty and that you have a brain, and you need to follow rules as they are written and not think, not critically think. So people are like, never again Holocaust. Oh, so this means never again Jewish Holocaust. No, never again any Holocaust. Never again for any people. And yet we had Rwanda, we had we had the genocide in Rwanda. Now we're having the genocide in Palestine. We had the genocide of the Armenian. We had so many genocide. We have Sudan. We have Yemen. We have so many people. Congo. Like so many people are being killed and dehumanized, and we're finding it normal because it's the history is being written by those that win the war, and those that win the war are the people that are actually, it's like a network of same people, whether it's in Africa, in the States, in Europe, in the Middle East. We need to wake up and understand we're actually being manipulated by one circle that is dominating these whole different places. And that's far-reach. So, like.
Yeah. So a friend of mine, a Palestinian American, grew up in the occupied West Bank, but emigrated to the United States and has been living here for a long time. And very compassionate person, very much involved in his own awakening, his own study of himself and the world. I told him I was going to interview you, and I asked him what question should I ask, and he's concerned that Jewish Israelis, Jews in the United States and other parts of the world as well, have been so ingrained with an ideology of Zionism that he asked what can wake people up from that, and whether what you're doing what do you find with the people that you work with, where you're opening their hearts, where you're opening them to this higher sense of human identity or spiritual identity. Does that do they then change their view about this Zionist project?
Some people do, but change is a process. It's not an event. It doesn't happen within a day. It's not because they're going to participate in one of my training or one. I mean, some people do. Some people have an awakening, and some people need more time. I think what is really important to do right now is to change the narrative and understand that the root cause of the trauma is that if we remove, Israel was created based on fear. And what October 7 did is that it confirmed that fear. It's like the Jewish need to have a country of their own, otherwise they will be persecuted or they will be killed. But this is happening within your own state that you created, and so your own legitimacy, what you created, doesn't work, doesn't function. A state based on fear and a community based on fear will constantly attract that fear. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that there's no threat. There's threat, but there's threat not only for the Jewish people. There's threat for many communities. There's threat in Congo, there's threat in Burundi, there's threat in so many different communities. And if we say every community that feels threatened needs to build its own state, it defeats the purpose. What we need to do is deal with the origin of this fear. Why are Jewish being persecuted, or why had they been persecuted? And what is this idea creating an identity of higher people versus lower people? That's what happened with Hutu and Tutsi. That's what's happening with Palestinian and Israeli. That's what happened with the German and the Jewish. Like we constantly, as a human species, we're seeking to show that we are better than. And what if we shift that and we understand that your safety is my safety? And I am not better from you, even if we look different, we still have the same essence. So I think that what is challenging right now is that the Jewish identity is feeling like the Jewish across the world are feeling threatened in their own identity, as if their identity is linked to having a safe space that is materialized in a state. And if they don't have that state, then they're not safe in the world. That's terrible. That's terrible. And so how can we create a place where, a world where everybody feels safe?
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhat on a slightly different area of study, people have found increasingly been coming out of the closet, you might say, the use of psychedelic substances from plants and some synthetics to alter consciousness and make big shifts in identity, what we call what's your feelings about that, your own experience of that, and maybe the people that you work with has that been helpful for some of them?
I think there's a whole project for bringing together Palestinian and Israeli to use psychedelic as a tool for healing. And I find psychedelic is a way to show you the light in the tunnel, but you actually need to do the work. And for me, I have used psychedelic, but not to do the work itself. And that's where integration work comes in. I feel like it's really important that what psychedelic give you the sensation of that we are one. But it's hard for us to embody it because we are in this 3-dimension and we actually need to do the work inside work to be the one. And what the work with psychedelic, from my perspective, has become an escapism of like feeling this sensation of the oneness and feeling so comfortable in it. And so running away of the 3D where we're not feeling it. And I want to feel it all the time. I don't want to feel it on psychedelic. And I do. I feel it all the time. I feel we're one. That's why peace activation is there. It's like, how can I activate the peace inside of me and the oneness inside of me? And it's integrated, embodied. That's the experience that we're here to have. We are spiritual being having a human experience. And this human experience is going through these challenges, this suffering, this pain, and remembering our divine essence. And if I remember my divine essence, that there's space for me to remember your divine essence and not block you in a box of identity of Palestinian, Israeli, Muslim, Christian, Jews, or whatever identity we're being pushed into.
Beautiful. Well, it's been wonderful talking with you, Eva. We could go on and on. I have many things we could share and talk about. Is there anything that you just want to put out there? Any sort of final words that?
I want to actually invite you, like in half an hour, we have the weekly call that is happening every week, peace activation, compassion in action.
How does somebody find? I'll post it when I put this up on YouTube, information about your work. But how would somebody find that? But they won't see this, that they'll be able to watch it in a half an hour.
Okay.
So
well, yeah, but it's like every week there's this weekly call. We have Expand the Box, a workshop that we're holding next week. That is actually, how can we expand the box of our current crisis and think of solution that we haven't actually discovered up until now. And there's the retreat where we're inviting Jewish and Palestinian from the diaspora to work together. I feel like right now, Palestinian and Israeli are deep in the trauma in Palestine and Israel, and they need support actually from outside. And one way we can support them is by doing our inner work and not be a trigger for other people. So that would help, for instance, the student in all these universities that are increasing the amount of violence and increasing the amount of hatred in the field. I envision a field where we can come together to solve the solution, to solve the problem, and not be part of the problem. And right now, what's happening outside, it needs to connect to a real direct solution and be part of that solution. And we can only be part of that solution if we increase the amount of healing, trauma, grief, love, and peace rather than hatred and hate speech or, triggering events and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you, Eva.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Alan.